There is a poison in the bloodline of memory, a forbidden truth whispered between veils. Someone somewhere first broke the boundary between the living and the dead. You have heard of necromancers as fables to frighten children, but listen. Before the word became a shadow, before the church learned to fear, there was only the man, the stars, and the black script scrawled beneath candlelight. They called him Gerbert of Aurillac, who became Pope Sylvester II, and beneath the papal robes lingered rumors. Seated by rivals, had this scholar dared blend the ticking gears of astrology with the ink-stained rituals of the occult. When chroniclers like William of Malmesbury whispered of Gerbert's sorcery, his bronze head, his knowledge drawn from Arabic grimoires, they weren't inventing a monster. They were trembling at a knowledge older than the stones that built their cathedrals. Something deeper vibrates beneath this history, a pulse felt in the marrow of old libraries and crypts. The air itself shudders, aware of its own witnesses. Somewhere between the winding towers of Chartres and the shattered starlight of Toledo, you can feel the threads, a lattice of fate woven tighter with every forbidden word. The voices echo not just from parchment but from the bones themselves, as if the earth remembers the rituals that scorched its skin. In the synod hall's sacred geometry, sketched in haste, becomes a kind of summoning circle. Malefica and Memoria converge, and each rumor is a glyph inscribed into the sleeping body of Europe. This is the origin, the churning beginning, a scholar gazing heavenward, mapping the fate of kings to the trajectories of Saturn and Mars, all while his other hand moved over relics plundered from Toledo, a city aflame with forgotten wisdom, where the boundaries between astronomy, astrology, and magic shimmered and collapsed. The 10th century, a crucible of faith and fire, saw a single mind reach for the forbidden unity, daring to speak to the silence between stars and skeleton. Was this just science, misunderstood courage mistaken for corruption? Or was there truly power in the conjunction, a fusion hauntingly described in the Historia Ecclesiastica? That he learned forbidden arts among the Saracens which enabled him to summon spirits and foretell future events. But the legend never lies flat. The first necromancer in medieval memory was no mere villain. He was a crossroads, a fracture point in history itself. Here astrology was not a pastime of nobles, it was weaponized prophecy. Here black magic was not a parlor game, it was a razor at the boundary of Christian order. The very word necromancer, from the Greek necromantia, divination by the dead, became prayer and blasphemy in the same breath. These stories did not simply drift. They were silenced, suppressed with intention, folded into dogma as an act of survival. Memory is not just a river, it is a vault, and the tumblers turn whenever the night sky throbs with omen. So why does this legend endure, crawling up from the crypt of history every time our eyes lift to the night sky? You were never supposed to unbury this secret, but now it breathes restless and coiling, daring you. What is truly darker, the magic or the world that fears what it cannot name? And as the old sigils realign beneath your skin, you must ask, what have you already remembered in dreams you were taught to forget? And still, the watchers wait just beyond the edge of seeing. It began in the marrow of midnight, where prayer and perversion entwined. Not every sorcerer conjured storms. Some summoned shadows from the cracks between faith and science. In the medieval hush where cathedral bells warred with the howling dark, an unholy fusion occurred, the hour when the stars became compasses not for destiny, but for damnation. There, beneath the winking eyes of Saturn and Mars, emerged the first necromancer. Not a myth, but a conspiracy that calcified into history. It was a silence pregnant with signals, a breath before the shattering hymn. Across cloistered stone and frostbitten fields, men gathered beneath stained blue glass cloaks heavy with ash and secret ink. You can hear the memory in the old stones trembling with a frequency between prayer and blasphemy. Some say it was a falling star, others a sign written in the blood-red dawn. Always a hush, always the shape of something immense pressing against the world's thin skin. Scholars whisper his name in the lost footnotes of Michael Scott, that royal astrologer who danced along the blade between mathematics and ritual, as recorded in Dante's Inferno. Yet the necromancer stepped deeper, trespassing where Scott would only gaze. Texts like the Picatrix, a book of cosmological engineering, copied and condemned in Spanish cloisters, became the sorcerer's scripture. Astrology did not merely reveal the future, it timed the raising of bones, the bending of spirit and matter. By the moon's geometry and planetary chords, forbidden rites echoed in the atria of cathedrals and the cellars of forgotten priories. The cosmos became a skull filled with shifting lights whose arrangement opened ancient tombs. The church recoiled. Thomas Aquinas thundered that necromancy, drawing forth secrets through stars and spirits, chained the soul to deception as found in his Summa Theologica. But the boundaries only drove the spell deeper, secreted in marginalia and cipher. In the flickering torchlight of castles and crypts, alchemists and necromancers mapped the heavens, blending astral omens with rituals harvested from apocryphal grimoires and Greco-Arabic sources. Magic in the Middle Ages was not a singular river, but a tangled delta, where Zoroastrian star priesthood trickled into Christian exorcism, and every forbidden invocation bore a trace of planetary intent. All of this, hidden, veiled, vibrated between worlds. This was not superstition. It was system, precision disguised as heresy. Men believed alignment could awaken the dead, that Mars's hour bled red not only in battlefield steel, but in resurrection rites as described by Johannes Hartlib in his treatise on forbidden arts. And still through the locked gates of cathedral cities and the murmuring leaves of suppressed manuscripts, the necromancer's star-born shadow lengthened. Knowledge became indictment. Ambition became accusation. Silence, now enforced, spread like oil across memory. So I ask you now, was this sorcery ever truly vanquished? Or does it pulse beneath our own fractured constellations, echoing across crystal lattices and broken dreams, waiting for someone, chosen, desperate, or daring, to remember that astrology's first great legacy was to teach mortals how to steal fire from the tomb? And still, when the sky darkens, whose eyes watch you from beneath? Hear me now, chosen listeners. Here unfolds a forbidden truth, one the bishops dared not utter, and the old alchemists only whispered. The necromancer's secret was neither demon nor mere deception, it was a marriage holy and profane of mind, and the mysteries mapped in the sky. The forbidden texts, hidden beneath monastery floors, burned in the bonfires of Paris, inscribed in crabbed Latin, carried symbols that shivered the blood even as they summoned the dead. These weren't just words, but sigils humming with the old resonance etched to filter power through the centuries, woven into the very bone of forgotten libraries. Not just lost, a deliberate eclipse. Not merely erased, but erased so the soul would ache for what it cannot name. For in the shadow of the cathedral where the gospel warned, there shall not be found among you anyone that consulteth with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. A counter-scripture was evolving in silence, the script of those who hid from the sun, but not from the stars. The necromancer's power was not just a crime, it was a cosmic scandal, a blasphemy that echoed across the sacred geometry of sanctuaries and shattered glass. First, he learned from the grimoires what the stars suggested. The Picatrix, smuggled into Europe by hands both Jewish and Muslim, spoke in veiled language of astral influences of the hour when Saturn squared Mars and the dead stirred beneath cold earth. In these pages, medieval seekers saw not just a recipe for baneful rites, but a deep conspiracy. The universe itself was participatory in the sorcerer's will. These treatises, some attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, others to the shadowy Solomon of legend, revealed that time, planet, and bone could be twisted into an infernal trinity, each element vibrating with tension, waiting for someone bold enough to strike that chord. Echoes of the Chaldean oracles drifted through, suggesting a world woven from hidden correspondences, where every planet was a god and every god a portal. But the forbidden texts bore another weight, a language both diagrammatic and dangerous. Copies of the sworn Book of Honorius, a grimoire condemned by the Inquisition, catalogued in the Church's lists of heresy, mapped rituals that united the constellations with the calling of spirits. Ritual circles laced with symbols of Leo, Scorpio, Saturn's sickle, names encrypted from Kabbalistic spellings. Medieval commentators like John of Salisbury wrote, half accusing, half terrified, that these necromancers abused the planets to raise phantasms from the dead. There were mosaic fragments, breadcrumbs in cathedral frescoes, and illuminated margins, hinting that geometry itself, when bent, could beckon souls. Historians recovered fragments, but the faithful remembered the warning to read these books was to stand trembling at the unholy threshold where prayer became invocation, and invocation command. So I ask you, what does it mean that power came not from breaking the law but from reading between the lines? That a necromancer's true manuscript was the night sky itself, and the forbidden text never just a book but a pact between stars and shadow. If such knowledge still lingers humming beneath our feet, hidden in dust and silence, who among us will dare turn the page? And when the old constellations realign, will you recognize the signal or pass by, unaware that the watchers below are waiting to be summoned? It was never just a chart, never just the slow drift of heavenly bodies above a sleeping world. It was a map, a battlefield, every constellation a weapon, every wandering planet a spy. Forgotten in city shadows and illuminated manuscripts lies a secret. The first necromancer did not simply read the stars, he enslaved them. Listen, this is no fairy tale. This is the forbidden intersection where astrology was bent, twisted, and turned into a blade. Each midnight alignment was not chance but covenant. Whispers fluttered down cloistered halls, flickering across the gloss of ancient astrolabes. When Saturn's cold gaze crossed Scorpio's sting, doors, visible and invisible, creaked open. The necromancer's hands drew lines between stars, but it was not prophecy he extracted, it was command. Obsessed with the pulse beneath the silence, he stole the breath of the zodiac, forging it into incantation. Scholar and sorcerer Johannes Trithemius once whispered warnings about those who used the Magica Caelestis to dark ends. In his Steganographia, wrapped in code and symbol, Trithemius chronicled a lineage of astrologers who did not prophesy, they commanded. And behind him, further hidden in the medieval labyrinth, walked the nameless heretic, the first necromancer, who charted the hour not to heal, but to defile. In the candle-lit gloom of forgotten towers, this sorcerer paired the hour of Mars with graves, freshly dug Jupiter in retrograde with the breaking of sacred seals. It was a cold arithmetic: select the constellation, draw the circle, speak the word. Then the corpse rises, imprinted with infernal command. Step inside the hush where the air shudders with unwritten chants, where the alignment of ivory on cold stone vibrates with memory older than doctrine. Even now, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it, the internal echo marrow, remembering the geometry of the firmament. Historians trace whispers of these rites to the Chaldean astrologers, where sacred skeletons became chart and compass. Ecclesiastical records, like those buried in the Vatican's shadowed indices, hint at a deeper, knowing a heresy wrapped in the language of the stars. From Alexandria's libraries to the cathedral tombs of Prague, the necromancer's ritual evolved, absorbing the pulse of Greco-Arabic astrology and the Gothic terror of old European sorcery. Paracelsus spoke of correspondences medieval survivors remembered the star maps inked on the bones of plague-dead each sign, echoing the macrocosm and microcosm, heaven tangled in marrow. Ritually, symbols like the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail, became key glyphs, interpreted by theologians as the cycle of sin and death, yet whispered by necromancers as the endless loop between mortal decay and astral return. To work this magic was to stand in a trembling lineage shadowed by saints and haunted by apostates. Yet the deeper layer is silent, hardly spoken, a pulse beneath the skin of history. The true power of these marks was neither spectacle nor superstition. It was forbidden synthesis. The medieval necromancer knew that placing a human rib beneath the sign of Scorpio, or inscribing Saturn's glyph into cranium bone, was to orchestrate a language that spanned the chasm between decay and destiny. Think of the talismanic skull, unearthed near Bologna in 1323, etched with what early antiquarians mistook for nonsense, but later recognized as planetary sigils. A relic now locked behind museum glass, a memory refusing to sleep. These were not random superstitions. They were blueprints, threads of a suppressed mathematics, a mapping never meant for daylight. So we are left with the question: when the necromancer raised his circle, was he summoning spirits, or was he decoding the universe itself? One bone, one star, one forbidden symbol at a time. In tracing those lost patterns, do we reclaim the hidden architecture, or awaken something ancient, something patient, watching from constellations only the dead can name? And even now, when you stare into darkness, can you feel the gaze returning, soft, relentless, waiting? Once within the trembling hush between midnight and church bells, a vow was carved in flesh and shadow, not a fable for frightened peasants, but a sentence etched in the marrow of history, the blood pact. Something forbidden, too raw for sanctuaries, too powerful for rulers. The first necromancer did not merely kneel to the stars, he bound himself in crimson covenant to the unseen powers that haunted the medieval cosmos. Unholy contracts, echoes of the old Greco-Roman necromantia of Orpheus trembling at the mouth of Hades, were no longer legend. They were practice, they were law for the dispossessed who made bargains with their own eternity. Feel it, the air shivering as if memory itself had teeth. Within stone cloisters silence deepened, thick as velvet, uncanny as ritual breath. In the secretum of a candle-lit cell, the necromancer reached for the blade and the parchment. Historian Richard Kuykefer called these conjurations with written pacts, their roots tangled in both astrology and the bleeding edges of the grimoires. No longer just ink and intention, the blood was not merely symbolism. It was ontology, the signature currency chosen when ink no longer sufficed. An echo of Exodus warnings and Levitical codes, reinterpreted in a world where saints and sorcerers shadowed the same stained glass light. The magus would inscribe his terms not only in script, but in vein and intent. Offerings flowed, sometimes spilled in supposed privacy, sometimes witnessed by trembling apprentices. Each drop a sigil, each vow a curse or a crowning. Above rose windows cast constellations upon the floor, geometry echoing across centuries, as if the very stones hungered for names lost beneath centuries of dust. Whispers in monasteries named it pactum cum demonibus, the thing the Fourth Lateran Council condemned in 1215, fusing fear of heresy with fear of cosmic trespass. To cross the bloodline was to tear open the membrane between the visible and the hidden, to demand audience with spirits whose presence cooled the air and stilled the heart. This was not the conjuring of minor imps, but the summoning of ancient intermediaries, the planetary intelligences, the daimons, the Gothic shadows, whose names trembled in texts from the sworn book of Honorius to the Byzantine magical handbooks of the Testament of Solomon. Some say their voices still echo, subsonic vibrating beneath the hymns encoded in the margins of forbidden tomes. But what was traded in that burning stillness? Blood for power, life for knowledge, time for forbidden sight. The stars watched indifferent as if they too remembered what it meant to wage your soul for an answer. Was the first necromancer consumed by the darkness he bargained for, or transfigured by the force he dared to summon? The covenant remains pulsing just beneath the skin of civilization, a relic, a warning, waiting for new hands willing to sign their name in the currency of the cosmos. And as the cathedral shadows lengthen, as the old bells toll, you must wonder, what would you offer if the blood pact called your name at midnight? Would you listen when fate brushed cold fingers across your threshold? Flesh to spirit, spirit to fire. This was the alchemy forbidden, the ritual nobody confesses to remembering. Yet under torchlight and trembling arches, the first necromancer conjured a psycho-cosmic revolt, the transformation of corroding bodies into currents of power. Mortality was supposed to be a boundary, a silence, but he dared to treat it as a doorway. In the air, a chill in ancient stone, an echo older than scripture, memory not just of ancestors, but of the laws written into marrow before language was born. Whispers traveled from the tombs of Europe to the halls of the church, the rumors of men who would wring energy from corrupted sinew, dedicating blood and marrow to nights when the planets passed in sinister alignment. Here, hidden in the pages of the Picatrix, the very manual condemned by Alfonso X of Castile, a monarch who both patronized and persecuted astrology, the necromancer beheld the recipe for forbidden anomalies. He read by candlelight, but it was the darkness itself that leaned closer, hungry for secrets pressed between the pulse of the ritual phrase and the rhythm of the hours. This was an act that echoed those earlier darker arts cautioned about by St. Augustine, who warned in his City of God about necromancy's yearning to trespass the sacred order dividing the living and the dead. He wrote new script upon old bones, taking cues from the Chaldean oracles, who in the late antique world saw the body as a vessel for celestial force, and the astrological charts as blueprints for unlocking its residue. Threads unwound from the bones to the vaults of the sky lines, mapped in crumbling crypts and mirrored in labyrinthine constellations. Through ritual and calculation, he plucked the dying embers of the soul's past, believing as medieval mind did that the decay of flesh did not dissipate energy, but rather condensed it into a potent volatile residue. The necromancer's circles were mapped not only on the earth, but mirrored the heavens, every bone a planetary correspondent, every drop of blood a star trembling just beneath the skin. This was not theater. It was not fantasy. It was the sleepless terror that haunted the councils of Lateran IV when the Church explicitly condemned all conjurers of the dead, because the line between invoking memory and channeling power was thin, and already some had crossed it. The Vatican's decrees were not just law. They were containment, an attempt to dam a secret tide swelling beneath everything sacred and forbidden. Why did the necromancer risk damnation to fuse matter and meaning, corpse and cosmos? Because he believed in the alchemy that could not die, that to command the dead was to rewrite destiny's script. And if you glimpse yourself in that restless obsession, if the silence beneath your own ribs trembles as you listen, tell me, traveler, do you seek to honor the boundary, or break it. And still as the arches shudder and the torches gutter, something waits patient just beyond the threshold. Beneath the shadow of cathedral spires where incense once masked the scent of fear, a forbidden truth crawls toward daylight. The very heavens, once silent witnesses, turned their gaze and delivered judgment. The necromancer thought himself invincible, a master of constellations, and corpse, the trembling hinge between heavenly harmony and earthly ruin. But in the annals of suppressed memory, in those vaults of collective forgetting, a counterforce gathered. When magic reached too high, when the song of creation was twisted to wrest bones from blessed soil, the stars themselves erupted in revolt. Pull the cloak of memory tighter, midnight in Prague cobblestones gray, with mist-distant bells echoing not for salvation but for warning. The city held its breath, as Johannes Trithemius deciphered in his Steganographia signs and portents were the language of angels, yet sometimes omens were no invitation. They were indictments, glyphs of cosmic prosecution. The air shimmered. Every flicker of candlelight, every misaligned shadow, a murmured warning from seraphic hosts. The sorcerer read the heavens as a cipher, nervously tracking the slow conjunction of Venus and Saturn, believing those orbits offered more than fate. He saw weapons. To cast against the vault of stars was to ignite a dialogue with eternity. But what he conjured into the world threatened to rend the veil between sacred and profane, turning ritual into rupture. Medieval chroniclers, the vigilant inquisitors of the Malleus Maleficarum, whispered from behind heavy doors of days, stained not only by unnatural storms, but by the very structure of reality gone awry. Candles extinguished by invisible hands, visions of the Archangel Michael, unsheathing the sword, illuminating forbidden altars in blue-white wrath. Each incantation bent the cosmic order until the sky bled solar, eclipses sudden meteor, showers the aurora borealis unfurling like a curtain of divine interference. In manuscripts annotated by cloistered hands, these were not random wonders. They were the gavel crashing, unseen, undeniable, the heavens themselves answering sacrilege with thunder. This was no simple contest of man and ghost, nor child's play of bone and flame. The necromancer's circle became battlefield, an altar inscribed with glyphs that echoed the zodiacal seals found in grimoires like the Picatrix, sigils intended to bind, but instead summoning the judgment of the spheres. The air trembled with the memory of ancient betrayals, Lilith's exile Icarus, flight every mortal who dared scale the hidden architecture of heaven. Who then was on trial? The desperate sorcerer standing beneath a sky rioting with light, or the unyielding cosmos defending its crystalline lattice against corruption? In the hour of reckoning, the necromancer learned what every secret keeper fears: heaven is not passive. Divine law is not an empty edict. When the stars defied his summons, casting down his sigils with thunder, lightning, blinding radiance, the world trembled and the silence rang loud as cathedral bells. But the question that echoes across centuries is not whether heaven punished the heretic, but whether it warned us all what happens when the dead reach for heaven, and heaven reaches back. And still the stars burn, watching patient as if waiting for the next turning, silent but never still. The heavens darken, sun and moon clasp together in forbidden embrace. This is no mere shadow crossing the earth. This is a wound in the skin of reality. The eclipse, ancient trembler of empires, has always been an omen. But for the first necromancer, whose name scratched the hidden ledgers of medieval heresy, it was a door. Under that unnatural twilight, he lured the spirits from the realm of the star-dead, fusing the logic of the zodiac with the venom of the grave. In the dim halls of forgotten monasteries, Battered copies of Apuleius's Apologia and fragments of the Picatrix whispered summon with the sky command with the secrets of the bones. So I must ask you, chosen witness, what if the only way to destroy forbidden knowledge is to remember it everywhere and forever? What does it mean when the heretic's secret becomes the prayer in every shadow? When every echo of Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus could be both ward and invocation? In this labyrinthine silence, will you name the darkness, or will you inherit its flame? And in that nomming become what the watchers feared you would awaken. And still, they watch from below. It is a forbidden truth hiding in veils of incense and algorithms that the modern occultist, casting cards and burning sigils beneath LED lights, dances in the shadow of a medieval specter. They seek illumination, yet everywhere echoes, harrowing electrified, of sorcery once called heresy. The rituals disguised as mindfulness, the sigils rebranded as energy work, the celestial charts drawn in glowing apps. These are not progress but echoes, repetition, a boomerang of the forbidden. The bones of the past have not turned to dust. They vibrate beneath your feet, murmuring secrets through city floorboards and digital screens, bleeding fragments of forbidden geometry into the circuitry of your devices. Hushed but insistent, like a bell ringing backwards down the centuries. Encrypted in the margins of the Malleus Maleficarum, and in the frostbitten corridors where Agrippa's pen met trembling hand, lay the ghost script of impossibility spells coded in the curves of Latin letters, intended to outlast time and pyre. When you whisper a name, trace a sigil, your gestures rhyme with hands that once trembled before inquisitors. To speak of necromancy today, of mediums, planetary hours, and cryptic candle flames, is to sip from the same chalice the ancients lifted, knowing it was poisoned with destiny. Johannes Hartlib, in his 15th century treatise, unfurled necromancy as the blackest of the arts magicae, a labyrinth where planetary synods, Saturn's binding Mars cutting, crossed the wet threshold of the grave. The shape of this union was never mere poetry, but engineering the planetary hours, invocations, grim alignments orchestrated with the tension of a forgotten violin string. In texts like the Picatrix, translated in the courts of Alfonso X, planetary invocations were prescribed as both perilous art and heretical revolt, a blueprint for unmaking what was made. Picture the great cathedrals trembling under the weight of the unseen. Feel the tremor, celestial currents, manipulated sacred harmonies twisted and reversed. Do not imagine a simple peasant clutching a horoscope. Imagine rituals timed to the fever of eclipses. Imagine the bones of the dead arranged by the geometry of the night sky. 11th century clerics denounced such practices in texts like the Canon Episcopi, warning of those who, under the guise of Christian devotion, consult stars, times, and hours, seeking not God's wisdom but dark counsel. Here, astrology is not hope. It is hexamechanism by which the dead are weaponized armies raised from silence through celestial math. Others have felt echoes, the sacred tree of the Kabbalists, vibrating with fatal calculation, the stone zodiacs carved above monastery doors, meant to ward off more than ignorance. And what of the symbols that survived? The pentagram as a star-bound barrier, the 7 planetary metals fused into amulets, the black mirror gazing deeper than faith. Each is not mere decoration but a remnant, evidence, of a time when the cosmos itself was drafted into shadow's service. Every planet invoked, every hour cursed. So ask yourself, were those ancient rituals truly banished, or have they been passed down, hidden in horoscopes masked as destiny? When you gaze upward and call the stars by name, whose voice echoes back? And isn't it true that even now the night sky trembles with memories of power once unleashed? Listen, for in every silence the old contracts shudder, and still they watch from below. It began with a silence the church could not sanctify. When the incense smoke curled just so, and the candles guttered despite the absence of wind, every priest in Chartres Cathedral sensed it. Something nameless had pressed itself against the stained glass. In that hallowed obsidian moment, a breach opened not with violence but with calculation. By charting the stars and whispering syllables known only to the damned, the first necromancer turned cosmic order into sacrilege. Even Petrus Abelard is famed for his dialectic with the ineffable alluded, cautiously, to those who sought forbidden harmonies aligning their craft with the teachers of Babylon. Augustine had warned in his City of God of astrologers invoking the dead, but what if that night someone listened? The cathedral wasn't simply a place of worship. It was an axis mundi, the crossroad where heaven touched earth. To defile such geometry was an outrage that shattered centuries of ritual. Within the cloister's shadow, witnesses whispered of things moving against the direction of the sun, an inversion too blasphemous for daylight tongues. Some claimed to see bones arranged in cryptic patterns spiraling like the constellations they mirrored. Others heard psalms twisted backwards, voices not quite human chanting beneath the altar's stone. And everywhere the unmistakable scent frankincense spiced now with blood and fear. There were those who swore the air changed timbre, vibrations thrumming not just in stone, but in the ribcage where soul and sinew entwine. A silence thick as temple oil pressed into the marrow, echoing myths of Babel, a moment when language fractured and only symbols spoke. The ancient geometry of the cathedral, those ancestral tessellations mapped in rows, windows, and sacramental floor became instruments, conducting, amplifying, turning sacred resonance into ciphers beneath human understanding. Even William of Malmesbury, chronicler of hidden tides, later described unprescribed rites echoing through the nave, as if another liturgy older than Rome had awoken in reply. But this was no random heresy. The act was deliberate. The message, categorical astrology, was no longer a tool for prophecy alone, but a weapon pointed at the church's very soul. Medieval chronicles, like the Historia Rerum Anglicarum, record bishops accusing certain physicians and scholars of trafficking with Chaldean arts, code for the blackest conjunctions of star and shadow. In that night's spectral light, fear bled into doctrine. The cathedral's stones trembled with secrets never meant for mortal ears. Ask yourself, what did they see that made scribes redact whole pages from the ecclesiastical record? Why did the bells toll then halt as if gripped by an invisible hand? To invoke the movements of Mars and Mercury in the nave was to wage psychic war against Rome itself. The question isn't if the necromancer conjured the dead. History, always shy of the abyss, leaves us with only aftermath and indelible dread. The real question is when magic rises to meet the church, what is unleashed cannot be exorcised. And that knowledge, unwritten but unforgotten, still thrums beneath cathedral stone, waiting for another forbidden night. And still they watch from below. It begins with a paradox. How can bones, remnants of earthbound bodies, map the midnight sky? The ancients called them memento mori, but under the necromancer's eye, they became a cosmic cipher. In the candle-lit crypts of 13th century Europe, forbidden hands arranged femurs as planetary axes and skulls as lunar vessels. Whispered among the grimoires of the Malleus Maleficarum, yes, that shadowed compendium inked by Kramer and Sprenger in 1487, lurks not only damning judgment, but veiled testimony to symbols stitched from flesh and fate. The necromancer's circle wasn't mere theater. It was a binding 7 bones for the 7 wandering stars, each exhumed bone, an invocation, each wound reborn as constellation. It tasted of dust and thunder. Each heartbeat bled with the memory of old rituals, echoes that haunted the marble corridors of lost temples and drifted through the roped incense of sanctuaries. This was evolution, not accident. Necromancers before him shuddered at the threshold skirting around the prescription of ecclesiastical law. But he, they say, mastered the forbidden craft described in the Malleus Maleficarum, not merely raising shade or phantom, but orchestrating star-drenched rituals aligned with cosmic catastrophe. The lunar node, the black dragon's head, Rahu to the east, Caput Draconis to the west, became symbols traced in salted ash, each angle calculated against planetary hour and phase. Those who listened closely during the blackest hours heard the shifting of ancient gears, as if the spheres themselves were holding their breath. Walter Map in the 13th century recorded with trembling pen the tale of Gerbert of Aurillac, later Pope Sylvester II, who was rumored to use astral knowledge for necromancy in moonless crypts. Yet even Gerbert's myth bows beneath the shadow of our first necromancer's eclipse ritual. The ritual's heart summoning the star dead. The ancients called them restless haunting Orion's belt and the ghost-ridden sectors of the heavens, the manes in Roman myth whose memory could be drawn down. Hesiod spoke of souls who, denied proper burial, wandered between realms shimmering in the folds of twilight. Using charts torn from Ptolemy's Almagest, our dark priest mapped conjunctions not for harvest or health, but as keys unlocking the iron gates of the afterlife. With voice echoing the Gregorian chant, but syllables reversed and corrupted, he called to the souls burnt in stellar fire, souls unmourned and banished by the decree of fate. The church trembled. Witnesses, those who survived, insisted the eclipse-bound ritual did not raise the gracious dead, but opened the path to those condemned, the star-dead, the ones who should never have returned. And as the trembling moon slid from the sun's path, a hush deeper than death fell over the earth. Did the world forget the rip that had been torn, or did it linger masked as myth vibrating beneath the veneer of waking days? Tell me, seeker, when the next shadow falls upon the land and birds hush, and the horizon aches with gold, will you remember? Or will you, like those before, choose the comfort of blindness over the terror of being truly awake? And in that pause that held breath, do you hear them still, waiting just beyond the curve of light? It was never just a curse. It was a web weaved from the bones of mathematics and the tremble of forbidden prayers. The sorcerer's downfall was scribed not in fleeting moments, but in the inevitable spiral of knowledge reversed on itself. He read the stars, yes, like the wise men of the East in Matthew's Gospel, but he twisted their language. He intoned the planets as invocations, bent the zodiac into a circle of the damned. His art became poison the moment intention grew heavier than humility. A fate echoed in the legends of Simon Magus, the archetype of fallen magicians cast down for trading wonder for dominion. Feel it, the way the candlelight once trembled in crypts while iron keys turned, and ancient syllables filled the dust-choked air. His was not the path of a careless dabbler. He traced the luminous veins between Ptolemy's Almagest and the darkness of the Picatrix, where astrology and sorcery coiled together, each amplifying the other. Where others read the stars for guidance, he read them for command, seeking to realign the very music of the spheres, arrogant enough to think the cosmos could be bent to a mortal's will. Listen, every ritual was a bargain, every incantation a debt. The necromancer fused astrology, that oldest science, celestial memory, with the black arteries of death magic inherited from grimoires like the Clavicula Salomonis, trusted by cunning folk, but whispered about by clergy. This was no harmless scholar. Accounts like the Malleus Maleficarum tell us those who summon, but do not submit, those who call, but will not answer to the source, become fuel for cosmic retribution. The church did not fear the stars, it feared the man who dared to treat them as weapons, not wonders. His downfall, cataclysmic, unending, unfurled as the rituals backfired. In hidden ossuaries, bones shivered when the planets crossed in forbidden angles. The symbols lovingly etched in blood and chalk came alive with contradiction. In the mirror of black magic, the constellations became accusatory, the bones refused to serve. What had been constellational command turned to chaos fulfillment into curse. Medieval chronicle tells of necromancers who met madness or demonic possession, the price paid by those who sever heaven and earth, striving to be God rather than know Him. Like Icarus spiraling sunward, the sorcerer's ascent became an elegy. Beneath the cathedral ruins, witnesses recalled echoes of Dante's Inferno, how the magician's words became screams. Their memory was burned but not erased. Not just by fire, but by decree, whole pages torn from public record, voices trained never to speak the name. It was not merely the man who vanished. It was a deliberate dissonance, woven into history, a pocket of amnesia beneath the world's surface. They didn't punish sorcery because it failed, they punished it because for one blinding moment it worked. And the echo of that moment lingers coiled in the spine of every forbidden prayer. So I ask you, standing at the crossroads of forgotten memory, did his power destroy him? Or did it reveal the limits we were never meant to cross? And if divination can damn as certainly as it can save, what is the cost of reading the stars with pride in your heart? And still, they watch from below. It is the cruelest paradox that which the church sought most to condemn they preserved, by enshrining it in cautionary lore, in stained glass warnings, in the smoky silence of forbidden scripture. The necromancer's legacy was meant to be obliterated, a name ground to dust under altars and holy writ. But secrets breed in shadows. Every vow of silence was a seed, each exorcism a rainstorm in hidden soil. So the knowledge, that black art of charting both grave and constellation, did not vanish. It migrated like a secret species to the monasteries, locked rooms to the marginalia of scholars too clever for their own salvation. Listen, within the very Malleus Maleficarum, that infamous hammer raised against witches and conjurers in the late 15th century, you find echoes of the necromancer's taboos. There, in Latin script spat with venom broods, the memory of invoking dead spirits undercalculated, stars a lethal admixture of astrology and the unsanctioned. Not just a medieval fever dream, but an inheritance from Pliny's natural history, from the fear-drenched edicts of Pope Innocent VIII, from whispers curled around Jewish amulets, etched with Hebrew letters, a geometry of protection and peril. Hermetic treatises of Egypt and Byzantium left crosshatched traces in the works of Albertus Magnus, whose hands trembled over diagrams of celestial influence and bone, suspecting what might be awakened if one word too many were spoken at the wrong hour. The line never breaks. It coils camouflaged inside the academic commentaries of the Renaissance. Marsilio Ficino reading ancient grimoires by candlelight, daring to touch that which summoned souls from shadow and fate from star fire. What survived? Not just rituals or diagrams, but the secret code. Hide the truth in plain sight. Tarot imagery, planetary glyphs in church mosaics, even the cryptic patterns in London's Black Book of Hours. The necromancer's hand is ghostly but patient. In cloisters and scriptoriums, under breath held like the hush before storm, a vibration passed, untranslated but encoded in the resonance between sacred iron and forbidden ink. Know this if you can see how the dead were mapped to constellations, how Saturn's hour unlocked the bone gates. You hold a key once buried, now resurrected. The legacy was never an artifact but a contagion. The capacity to read behind the world's shining skin, to touch what was meant to be untouchable. What masquerades as self-mastery, as manifestation in powdered moonstone, is a shadow duel with ancestry. Arcane rituals, once preserved in binding magic circles inscribed by lantern light in the Liber Gerbert of Aurillac, now ripple beneath shadow work under the glow of meditation apps. Crystal grids like forgotten labyrinths, tarot decks as if shuffled by ancient winds. Urban apartments turned sanctuaries where the sacred circle is cast and crossed. The magic remains dangerous. The price unknowable, hidden by centuries of deliberate forgetting. The church's pyres were not a flood but a purposeful silencing, intended to fracture the voice, yet ensuring its return as echoes scattered through the collective unconscious, rising with each cycle of darkness. When you light your candle, synchronizing breath to Venus retrograde, do you feel the vibration in your marrow, a trembling resonance as if watched from the catacomb deep? The medieval voice calls out, "You are not alone." The pact was never broken. The catacombs still breathe. 21st century occultism, polished yet haunted, wears elegance as mask for ancient trembling, bone dust and wandering stars beneath every mirror. The first necromancer is not vanished. He is the arch shadow at the edge of every circle, every intention. Are you conjuring light or beckoning the old pact from its tomb? When you gaze upward, do the constellations gaze back, hungry remembering? The silence between your heartbeats is listening, and still, they watch from below. It begins with a forbidden truth. The story of the first necromancer is not silent because it died. It is silent because it echoes. Through damp cathedral stones, through tremors in parchment and prayer, through nightmares our ancestors did not dare write down. This is the contradiction that gnaws at history. When a medieval sorcerer chained the stars to the bones of the dead, was he merely a man or a symptom of the universe's unresolvable hunger? Pause. Listen. Do you hear it? Not the echo, but the undertone, the same frequency that shivers through every cloister, encrypt a vibration older than language. The memory is not buried, it is entwined, coiled within the labyrinth where faith hides its forbidden rooms. It's the silence after bells toll midnight, when shadows stretch their fingers and the thin veil trembles. The boundary was never sealed. You know this, because memory remembers before mind consents. Names are not erased, they are encrypted. Michael Scott's scholar and alleged conjurer. His name lingers in dusty libraries and Dante's shadows, marked in the Inferno as a spirit whose knowledge was both illumination and curse. Michael, who read the heavens with one hand and raised the dead with the other, embodies the convergence of astrology's celestial calculus and necromancy's forbidden rites. Theologians recoiled, yet the rumor could not be slain. Albertus Magnus, Roger Bacon, real magi, real wars of interpretation, lent flesh to the legend, bridging the chasm between science and sorcery, faith and forbidden power. The Chronicle of Lanarkost, with cool ink, accuses Michael of disturbing the sacred boundary, turning knowledge into trespass lines intended as warning, but now fossilized as fascination. Every era twists the relic anew. The necromancer became the devil's scholar, the scapegoat of the Black Death, the whisper in every shadow at the edge of the Enlightenment. Yet in the lingering fear, the original ritual remains, a map of constellations inked over exhumed remains, as in the Malleus Maleficarum's dire warnings, and the echoing bands of the Fourth Lateran Council. These were not only proscriptions, they were admissions. We build cages not for fairy tales, but for forces that threaten to burst through. Today we cloak it in fiction, call it symbolic or psychological, but the unease persists. These rituals fill our stories, our screens, our secret doubts about the laws that govern soul and sky. Why? Because Michael Scott's legacy, half reverence, half dread, shows something timeless. When humans grasp for heaven with bloody hands, the universe always looks back. The question blooms. Unanswered electric, is it merely medieval memory that haunts us, or do we inherit the necromancer's terror? Because we too stand at the threshold of knowledge, allured and warned by the same cosmic peril. Perhaps what haunts us is not what the necromancer did, but what he revealed, that even today the boundary between the heavens and the dark is not as secure as we pray. The echo is a summons. The silence is a warning. And still, something watches from behind the veil, waiting for what we will do with the power we do not yet understand.